Hey, everybody,
All right.
welcome to this. I screwed up. Hey, everybody, welcome to this. It is the day after Thanksgiving. Hey,
It
everybody.
is. And you know what else?
Huh?
Here's this Agile thing.
Yeah, with Mike Markey and also
And Matt Beam.
with Matt B. So we were talking about PI planning last time and outcomes of that. I don't know if we really closed the loop on that. We were also talking about MBIs, which is an interesting concept that I feel like I don't know enough about in detail, but I mean, I get the basic idea. That could be another topic. So,
Okay.
what do you think, Mike Markey? What do you want to do?
Let's go with your gut.
My
Given
gut
that
is
it's right
recovering
after
from Thanksgiving.
Thanksgiving. Right
Yeah,
after
my gut
Thanksgiving,
is
I'm sure
distracted.
everyone's gut is in a separate
Distracted.
place, a transcendent
Yeah.
place, even. Yeah.
Oh boy. Oh boy. So minimum business increments is an idea that comes from Al Shalloway, the guy from Net Objectives.
Okay.
And it replaces epics, he says. MVPs and MBIs replace epics. And high level, I'm the high level guy. I'm the big picture guy. I'm the step back and look on. So MVPs are about with an existing customer base, is this new thing valuable? Do they want it? Is it useful and usable? And
Mm-hmm.
MBIs are for an existing customer base, an existing product. What is the next increment of value? And I think really the difference between epics, because I was always thinking of epics as being what he calls MBIs now, but he's explicitly calling out it's really another. It sounds like another version of the done, 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 done.
Ah.
Right, everything you
Okay.
need. So, including operations, including marketing, including everything that our business, not the business, everything that our business will need to realize the potential value. Coding, testing, deployment, communication with customers, all of the follow-ups, all the metrics, the telemetry, the marketing, getting it into their grubby little hands, the whole thing, which presumably some of this was missing from Epic. Like, if you go to 100 companies that are doing epics, quote unquote, marketing's probably not included in that, right? It's just the coding and the testing, I think, is how a lot of them would look at it. But I'm just, that's more of a guess. I haven't been to those 100 companies.
I haven't
But
either, but I have been to one that has a very odd way of looking at epics.
go on.
And well, they're trying to hearken to some. It's more a duration or a span of time than a wholesale item.
Yep.
Like
Yep.
to use the MBI definition, it's kind of missing anything beyond the development of it.
Yeah. Totally.
And
I think that's
we
more
see some.
common than not than in the places I've been. Sorry.
Oh yeah, no, I'm sure. So when you're talking about epics, do you think about it as something that fits in a PI, or is it something that goes longer than a PI?
I think the traditional definition is that features fit within a PI, but epics might. Stories definitely fit within a sprint,
Yes.
right? Features fit within a PI by definition. If they
Okay.
don't, then they must be epics. And epics probably don't. They might fit within a PI, but they probably don't. So if you're looking at it from the effort or, God forbid, the duration,
Yeah.
those would be the sort of the guardrails. But again, I
Okay.
think it's really, it's like using a time-based formula for that is kind of like getting back to proxy and sort of, it's like the point is you've got stuff that's big and difficult to understand all the parts of it and riskier and then hasn't been broken down yet. And that's really what the epic and the feature and the,
See, the funny thing is when we talked about stories, it was easy for us to say stories fit within a sprint. That makes
mhm.
everybody got that, right? Invest, look, in a sprint, small, manageable, anything. But then we go and say, well, what's an epic? And the definition of an epic for the longest time, at least in my world, was, well, it's a story that's too big to fit in a sprint and needs to be
Yeah.
broken down into smaller stories. So that definition served very well. And then, so, and you look at the name, you go, well, a story is just one little narrative. And then an epic is a string of narratives coming together to form a bigger adventure, as it were. And then we need something in between. So we'll call it a feature. And I'm like, I don't like the terminology. I think that feature is very software centric.
Yeah.
Unless it's like a feature length film.
But they don't use Agile because they can plan everything out.
Mm-hmm. They have scripts.
Yeah, exactly. They know what's going to happen.
So this concept of a feature that fits within a span of some number of sprints can be smaller, could be as small as one, probably.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I'm just seeing what I have seen from my experience trying to coach within a context that is doing stuff that is shaped like scaled Agile in some form, right? So we are getting really top-down control, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
And we're sort of we're using these concepts in a way that's different than if it was a greenfield group of people who are starting from scratch and we're coming up with their own sort of conventions and ways of organizing and capturing the work. So like I said, to say something is by definition this or that because it takes X weeks or not is like not necessarily the most. It's got more of a project management smell to it than a product management smell to it. Is really what I would say.
By the way, in the midst of this, there's another term that is bandied about, and that would be initiative.
Yeah.
And an initiative is bigger than an epic.
I guess
it's all outdoors.
Initiative is it's the cousin of the theme, which is big, but the theme never ends because the theme is things like drive more revenue, cut costs, increase our reputation, reduce risks. There's a number of these concepts that are sort of floating around that it's kind of a choose your own adventure type deal where you can decide what makes sense in your but every ongoing concern needs these.
It's nice that you brought up theme, because theme was the sort of like the bastard stepchild of the user story. I think, wasn't it Mike Cohn who said that a story, you could take an epic and you would break it down to stories, but then if you needed to cluster stories together in a relatable packet, you would choose certain stories, you'd wrap a rubber band around them, and those would be a theme. Like they didn't necessarily map one-to-one to epics.
Could be. Mike has said some stuff. Yeah. I think Mike is the guy who advised us how to convert story points to dollars at one point. I'm not sure if he has disavowed. He said some controversial things, and
well, I mean, I guess. I mean, I can figure out how to do that too, but that's it depends on how you arrive at your stuff.
Yeah, totally.
But it's not. It's not a time thing. It is factored in for the actual capability of the team, right? Whatever the capability of the team, whatever they can produce, if you were to measure it in story points, is their velocity. If you take an average of velocity over time, we know what that team costs us on a sprint by sprint basis because it's this many people for this many hours, and that is independent of story points. So, but if you take the total output and divide it by the number of dollars, or divide that into the number of dollars, you get kind of a dollar value for a story point.
Let me say, there's a way to tell this story so that it's not crazy and it might be helpful. And it all depends on the way that you approach it, right? And one of my favorite jokes is, what do you call a group of Agile coaches?
An argument?
Disagreement.
Yes, yeah.
Exactly. Same idea. Like I've heard a coach say, "This is how it is," and if anybody disagrees with me, you're dumb and probably not paying attention. And
Oh,
then
even
that's what
worse,
that's
they'll
about.
say, "I didn't. You're not agile." They're like,
Yeah,
ooh,
exactly.
stop
It's like,
that.
okay, that's one way to approach it. Also, if you already use the principle of charity and say, well, what would have to be true for this to be helpful for somebody in some context, right? That is a different
Mhm.
way of approaching it that I don't see agile people always doing, disappointingly. But anyway, yeah. So Mike Cohn did say you could take groups of stories, I guess, and bundle them together into a feature. Was it a feature? No, a theme. You said.
A theme.
Yeah, it really depends on what, like, what is your approach for managing the product, right? What is your strategy, and how do you need to understand the work in a way that is simple and has, if you're using small chunks and getting quick feedback and like connected to the customer, it's hard. If you're doing the basics, I think you've got some leeway in terms of how you do some of the structure, but you know how to test it, right? Are you constantly getting to production with feedback, right? Can you demonstrate that you're doing the right thing? So
Well, we figured out a long time ago how to test the output of a team. I think that's fairly well understood. When they're part of a larger organism or a larger ecosystem, there has to be a point at which there's a coming together of the work of individual teams into a more complete whole,
yeah.
and that there's a level of testing, integration, whatnot that has to happen there that is by its nature at a higher level. So it I think one of the joints we were at, uh, they ended up adding acceptance criteria at the higher levels too. Like you would have an acceptance criteria on an epic, so that
Yeah,
when the pieces of the epic were completed, you could test the epic and see if it satisfies this higher order need, right?
totally.
And so in theory, if you went up the food chain, you could do that with a feature, right? You could go story up to a feature, feature up to an epic, epic up to God knows what. The initiative.
Yeah, yeah, totally. CEO's wishes. I do think that makes sense. Like, the best sort of implementations of safe product management, whatever, so the epic level would have business outcomes or some sort of lean business case, or probably you're thinking about the metrics, right, that you would expect to see impacted by this. Because you need that. I mean, the point of it is to really, correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is you need a connection between the highest sort of mission and purpose and objectives for the organization all the way down to what people are doing on a daily basis at the team level. And
In
one of the ways
theory.
to do that, yeah, is to have the epics have success criteria. The features be, honestly, the features are really good at, being hypotheses, right? To say, we think, okay, so the epic is, we want these business outcomes. We think we'll see this change in behavior in the metrics. Here's a feature that is really a hypothesis to say, if we do this, we'll see this change. And then the stories are like experiments that you can run quickly in a sprint. That's an approach I've seen that works pretty good. But use some connection all the way down, right? So everybody's
Mhm.
aligned and people can go as fast as they can because they know it's safe within this bounded solution context.
I agree
I'm
with
just saying
most of what
words.
you said, except when you use the word safe at the end.
Yes. Oh, it's risky for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it might not be branded.
Maybe we should brand that one.
Mm.
We're going to do risky.
Yeah, exactly. So coming up with what the acronym or the initialism is would take some work. Do you know there's a difference between an acronym and an initialism?
I didn't know of an initialism. What is that?
So one of them you pronounce, one of them you don't. So scuba, I believe,
You
it,
pronounce. It
you
stands for
pronounce it.
something.
Yeah, that's an acronym. FBI is an initialism.
Oh,
You don't say FIBI. You're welcome.
or and CIA, same thing.
Same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what is an agile release train?
That would be an acronym. An anachronism? Not yet.
Ah, I mean, I hear it say it's an art, but I also hear ART. So
Yeah.
I think all.
Yeah.
I
No, I
think
don't.
if your initial combination or your acronym is pronounceable, it'll be pronounced. And if it's
So then,
not,
therefore, it becomes an acronym.
yeah, if it's
Yeah.
unpronounceable,
I
then
think we
that
should
might
go with
be,
that.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's always better to have something pronounceable,
It's easier for people.
says the people involved in HTAT.
Well, yeah. That's definitely. It's not even an initialism. You don't say HTAT. It's just a crappy name. That's what that is. We'll have to incrementally improve it.
It's an increment.
It is. It's an
Actually, I
incremental
was
value.
looking at that. I was looking for the main page. And I'm going, we probably should put something a little more visually stimulating on the cover.
105%.
It might
Yes.
be
Let's work
time
on
for
that.
that. Like we've gone far enough in this bare bones increment with nothing more but the word or
Totally.
words.
Totally. It's time to put a roof on this car.
So
So,
anyway,
anything else to talk about? Yeah, MBIs. That's pretty straightforward. I feel like.
well, it is and it isn't. I mean, so it's one thing for us to say, well, we've seen business initiatives, we've seen business units make plans and strategies, and it's good to have those, and it's good to measure how you're progressing, and you should have KPIs or OKRs or the whatever the initialism of the day is, right?
Totally.
And we need to have all that stuff, but then we run into so many other organizations that don't have any of that.
Yeah.
And and you sit there and say, well, you as a product organization, you need to set up some sort of business driver, right? And they're like, yeah, we got that. Like,
Mm-hmm.
cool. Do you know what it is? Like, could you articulate it? Could you share it? And they would say, well, we're taking this pile of money and we're converting it into a stream of money, maybe. Right.
And it seems to keep working year after year.
Well, it keeps moving year after year, working.
Yeah.
I mean, lots of things work. You can do Scrum and not be agile, right? And
Yes.
so, in that sense, is Scrum not working? Don't know. It's not offering the benefits it could,
Right.
right?
Right.
So, lots of organizations stumble along with who do I have to convince to keep writing me a check to keep doing the stuff we've been doing,
Yep.
as opposed to proving that you exist. There was some story I saw, and there's a lot. Though the world is full of these apocryphal stories about the Elon Musks of the world. This one was
Yeah.
aimed at the Elon Musk, and it was a secretary who asked for a raise, and he said, "Well, tell you what, go on vacation for 2 weeks, and if in that 2 weeks I find I needed you, there was a valid reason for you to be here and therefore potentially to be paid more. And if I can get along without you, you're fired."
That seems a little bit abrupt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that again, you see it on a news page going by and you're like, maybe not,
Yeah. Elon's tough because he's so far out on one end of the distribution. You really can't it's hard to extrapolate. There's a lot of variability in terms of his behavior, apparently. I don't know the guy. I never spent, all I know about him comes through media. So I'm sure it's not.
You haven't ever spent any time with him
No.
hanging out around the water cooler.
Yeah. But I think you should expect people with unusual circumstances and unusual gifts to behave in unusual ways. And, you can discover useful principles. I think we talked about that last time or the time before.
Hmm.
He leans hard into iteration and feedback, and definition of done is apparently like the number one thing. But he's also going to do other stuff too, because he's like some kind of weird super genius.
Well, we talked about how a Tesla plant is run and everybody is chasing the bottleneck, like removing the bottleneck,
Mm-hmm.
which is a manufacturing thing. You would expect that in it's not like every Tesla vehicle is a brand new item. It's a repetition of a thing. So to optimize the flow of a factory in that manner makes total sense.
Yeah.
I don't know from the literature how the
Mm-mm.
software of the vehicle is derived at, and is that done the same way?
I
Um,
would be shocked if it wasn't. You
but
mean using agile principles, right?
well, agile principles, but those agile principles specifically, where there's no rhyme or reason to it, just go where the bottleneck is. Like there's a rhyme or reason, there's a point. We're trying to
Yeah.
produce cars, right? But this getting held up. Um, and so now he's going from a tangible physical device world into the Twitter sphere, which is arguably very little hardware.
Yeah. It's not. Yeah. Hmm. Somebody provided this analysis, I think, which is that space is hard, but it's complicated. This is the
Mm-hmm.
Kneffin sort of lens you're putting on it, right? It's super complicated to put a rocket into space and have it land itself, right? But it's not complex. Like it's all tractable. It's all physics. Whereas this social media thing, where you've got millions of individual humans interacting, is beyond complicated. It's complex, and that's why he has to iterate so quickly, because you can't plan for the evolution of a social media like you can for a rocket. The rocket, you know what it's going to do. You can calculate it. The social media thing is complex. It's emergent. You have to just try something and then get the feedback and try something else as quickly as possible. Maybe that explains some of the chaotic looking stuff, because he needs to find stuff quickly that works and move on. What do you think of that?
Fair. I mean, when you said that rocket is knowable and all that stuff, I'm like, well, yeah, I'm in your zero wind resistance physics world that we all experienced in high school. Um, that a rocket is simple. Land. I'm still freaking amazed at landing a rocket on
Yeah.
a floating platform that is subject to variations in motion, wind, trajectory, whatever, all these different things, and that they were still able to adapt that. Now that's freaking cool.
100%, and that's the maybe one of the most interesting parts of that sort of analysis, or the way of looking at it, is as complicated as that is,
Mm-hmm.
backing backing a rocket onto a moving floating platform, it's still just complicated. It's
Yeah.
orders of magnitude less stuff going on than the complex interactions of the people in a social network
You
where there's
know,
millions of nodes interacting randomly from your point of view.
yeah, I guess the easiest would if they just did the rocket in reverse and it just was a vacuum and it just sucked itself back down to the ground. That would probably be easier. I don't know why you didn't think of that.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, clearly he's not getting everything he could out of his people.
Like,
That doesn't seem that complicated.
no.
No, that idea sucks, honestly.
Well, thank you for entertaining it.
It's that was a joke. It's Friday after Thanksgiving. Let me just point out to people we are
That's
we're in
true.
a bit of a
And
sleepy
I don't
day.
know about you, but I'm in kind of a hiatus over the long weekend, so it's there's no real serious work happening today.
No, no, not really. We're just here to talk about MBIs. I think we have drained that concept.
It's okay.
I mean, we barely skimmed the surface, but like, what else do you want to say about it, really?
I don't know. I mean, the only other things for MBI as a knowable concept, and speaking about it in terms of MBI, we've probably gone as deep as either one of us is prepared to go. In just the concept in general of businesses maybe not being so good at measuring their own stuff. I don't know that MBI actually solves that problem. I I mean, MBI
Hmm.
is here's a mechanism or a thing you could use that will help you maybe achieve those other things.
It doesn't speak directly to metrics as far as I can tell. I think, yeah, you're right. It's more of a change in mindset, or it's a rebranding of the thing. I mean, basically your epics you could think of from the point of view of the person you're coaching, the epics become MBIs. And the shift is really, don't just plan for what you need to develop to do this work, Plan for everything you didn't think you didn't need to think about. That is, go from done to done in terms of your planning, right?
Well,
That's really the
don't
shift.
yeah, get out of the developer room, right?
Right.
It's not, and yeah, I mean, there's more to the existence of a product, and it's so if we extend the concept, projects have a beginning and an end and a definitive goal. Product lives on. It has a life cycle. It's got a birth phase. It's got a a growth phase, a maturity phase, and then it starts falling off, right, and eventually
Senescence.
is put to sleep in
Hmm.
a
Goes to
in
live on
a
a farm upstate, Product, New York.
yes, oh, where it is very happy and it will run with other products.
It romps for eternity
Mm-hmm.
with things
As
like
people remember,
the film camera and the video store you drive to.
getting film developed.
Yes, exactly. Where all the old products go to, I don't know, chase deer.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, agreed.
yeah. So and this has come up in several recent conversations for me, where we get back to one of the things that you should be able to measure is the value or the hoped for value of a feature,
Yeah.
right? Where you'll say, what kind of return on investment are we going to make from this?
Yep.
And that's another one of those things where I don't think a lot of organizations have I don't even know if it's a maturity thing, but I mean, do they like, what is this going to cost? Like, how much will you make with this? How can I know? How can I know what I'm going to make off this until we actually see what we made off of it? And then you have to isolate it and say, well, how much did that piece of it actually give you?
Right.
Right. And is that truly knowable?
Well, I mean, I don't think it's true. Truly knowable sounds like a high bar. I think that what I would say is you can have a better guess, right, than what you've got now, right? You could go through the exercise of thinking through. One of the things I'm struck with continually in coaching is the when I was in college, I took an English
Mm-hmm.
class, and they introduced us to this concept of the shitty first draft. Have you heard of this? In fact, I think they held it. They had us read a book called Shitty First Draft. I'll save you 100 pages of reading. The point is, spit something out for God's sake.
Mm-hmm. Just get something
You
out there.
know, you know, kind of the shape of the thing. You're scared to show it to somebody because it's not done. You're not sure if it's right. It kind of probably sounds dumb. It might reveal some ignorance that you don't want to show people. The point is, um, you know, you need to get something out there to react to. You need a placeholder for the conversation. And so, because the metrics are so like hard and, they're difficult to do, and they're so, if you were to be able to snap your fingers and get the perfect metrics, it would reveal so much about the effectiveness of what you're doing or not,
Mm-hmm.
right? It would be like suddenly somebody turned on an x-ray machine and we could see, oh, half the stuff you're doing is wasted. It feels like a combination of maybe I don't want to put myself out there and just start on a metric, right? And also it's so important to get it right that I'm scared of doing it wrong. It's
Well,
hard to
how
even
can
get the conversation started, honestly. But
see
I
I
think that is,
and maybe there's an analog here, like as you talk about that and you talk about how it's hard to know, and how do we when we ask developers to estimate the scope of a piece of work,
mhm.
we're asking them to guess, make an
Mhm.
educated guess, but it's
Yeah,
still a guess. We're asking the
wags.
same thing of the business. We would like you to
Yes,
make an educated guess at how much of an impact you think this is going to have.
yes,
And I think too many of them fall into the same trap that the developers did, where they thought, well, but what if I'm wrong? Well, if you're
yeah,
wrong, that's why we're calling this agile. We will adapt to the new information as it comes in. You should at least have a hypothesis, to your point,
yeah.
about what the effect of this feature is going to be.
Yes.
And then we can validate that assumption. We can take some measurements, weigh something in the wind, say, hey, we were making this much money before we released that. Now we're making that much money. May not be a one-to-one relationship, but it was involved in that process, possibly. So
Yeah.
are we
Another
asking too much? Or are we putting too much expectation on the businesses is what I'm saying. Or we're making them think they need to have all the answers.
I don't think so. I mean, another answer. So the question is, what if I'm wrong? Right? You ask that question hypothetically.
Yeah.
Rhetorically. Another answer to that is, well, if you're wrong and you have gone to the trouble of making a hypothesis or a guess and written it down, if you're wrong, then you have an opportunity to learn, right? You can get better if you go on record, right? And then see where you were. If you don't, if you keep doing this thing where, well, we spent X number of dollars last year, we'll do kind of the same thing this year, you're not really going to learn from that because you didn't make a prediction. You didn't sort of, you didn't bring any kind of theory to it. And so there's nothing to test. And
right.
so
Which is the same thing
really...
we do the same thing with the developers, right? If you didn't make an estimate, did you really think it through? Like if you thought about it enough to be able to give me an idea how big you think it is, then I feel more comfortable letting you embark on that, as opposed to, I don't know, we'll just see what it's going to do. You know, it'll be as big as it is, or as small as it is, or whatever.
Yeah, the sweet spot seems to be do as little analysis as possible to come up with a reasonable guess or reasonable hypothesis, a reasonable story, really, and then test it, and then keep doing that, as quickly as possible. And don't take too much time. Don't build too big of a story because that'll take too long to test. And don't show up with no story. Don't show up with no test. Right? It's a Goldilocks. Concept. Yeah. It's a Goldilocks situation so that you want to get the quick iteration.
Okay.
And there's now real risk in not doing that. Now we can say we killed it. Yes. And there's real risk in not doing that because there's a signal there that you're going to need to, there might not be one today, but there might be one next year. And when it shows up, right, showing you that you need to shift your investment, that's dangerous for a business if you miss that signal. Anyway.
All right.
So we've drained MBIs. Congratulations.
Nice job. Just like that.
Woo.
Bottle of liquid. You drain that too.
Indeed. Did you want to go on to the PI planning thing, or should we call it a short one this week? It's not that short. It's 33 minutes.
Yeah. Well, so I think in terms of, like, we had a question come up, and one of the Scrum Masters asked, is, so what are we calling this thing that we're doing now? Because we did something we called a PI plan. Does that mean we're doing safe? And he may as well said the safe. And the response was no. PI planning existed as a thing. Big room planning existed prior to the adoption of it by the thing that has come to be known as safe. All we're doing is pulling that practice into what we're doing as a means of engaging the business or product sooner to have them think forward better. Right? Like, it's almost like we said, we did not do that for you developers. We didn't do that for the development teams. You guys are going to get zero benefit out of that. Other than maybe knowing what's going on. Zero benefit is probably taking it too far. But it wasn't for you, right? It's actually for them.
Yeah.
And
Merry Christmas.
Yeah. Because the stuff that they made you guys do, where you had to think ahead 4 sprints down the road and make a prediction of whether or not you're going to be able to slot that into a delivery,
that doesn't really help you. does that?
No, because it's giving you a false sense of reality. I mean, you guys are struggling to finish one sprint. You try and
Yeah.
get into the set. Guess now the outcome of the first coupled with the outcome of the second, and then now couple that to the
Yeah.
third. Now couple that to the fourth. Like
Yeah.
that fourth one is almost worse than a guess because it
Yeah.
implies
You're
yeah
multiplying probabilities together there that quickly exceed the human brain's
yeah
ability to make any sense out of it.
which then says why are we spending so much time doing that? Right.
Well, devil's advocate, pushback position.
Okay.
Maybe the benefit to the developers is they can in the confidence vote they can give you one finger. I'll pick this one just to be polite, right? And tell you I have no confidence about this. Let's keep going. But that's maybe not built into a
Well,
particular way that.
I mean, it should be. There definitely should be a confidence vote. And there was one eventually. It happened as a survey, which was sent out after the fact.
Yeah.
But that survey came back with a handful of twos
Fingers.
in there.
Twos.
Yeah, two
Okay.
fingers.
So things that should trigger a replan but couldn't.
Things that should have triggered a replan, and
Yeah.
and it wasn't. It didn't even trigger a discussion. And because it's out of context, how could it? Right.
Totally. Yeah.
So one of the things I noted is in general, we had them do two. We had them do how do you feel about your team's plan, and then how do you feel about the overall plan, the collective of plans that were presented, more or less the PI's plan. And we got two different fingers for that, and one of them was lower than the other, and I bet you could guess which one.
Yeah, the more complicated one, I'm guessing, is lower confidence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just in general, the average was just one finger less. But and so everyone's like, well, of course, because people paid attention to their thing and didn't pay attention to everyone else's. I said, exactly. So the point is they did a safe bet. No pun intended. They said,
Yeah. Right. I
the
don't
other
know about
teams,
the yeah.
I can't speak to anyone else's plan because frankly, I ignored everyone else's presentation because no one told me I was going to be asked to do this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So I figured some of them didn't do as good a job as we did. Therefore, I have less confidence in the whole. It's a simple playing the odds kind of bet to make.
It's a reasonable input to give the system, given how the system arrived at that moment.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah. But if they went into it next time knowing, by the way, remember, we're going to ask you that. So when we're doing those draft plan presentations, you probably ought to pay attention.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's, the way that you set these things up matters. The way that you think about the collaboration and you are able to get people actually connected. This isn't a criticism of anybody who was involved in this, by the way. But if the system doesn't afford people on the teams, the individual development team members, a way to get involved and really look at their feedback and consider it as a real first class input to the system, if we don't act like we need their input and use it, it's not surprising that they would
check
not
out.
have much. Yeah, that's what I would do.
Or perhaps they were in a situation where it didn't matter what they said.
I've seen this as well.
I had no reason to believe that you would take my numbers this time. You never took them before.
It never made any difference if I thought it was hard or difficult. Like, you told me this shall happen by this date. So I don't know. Okay, let's go.
So we just were waiting for that. We're waiting for you to tell us is it? When's it due? And the implication was at the end of the PI, because that's so. Anyway,
Totally.
We ended up with discussions about prioritization going into that, and recognizing the fact that the product people probably could do a better job of prioritizing, breaking stuff down into measurable units, not spreading the organization across 14 threads of execution.
Yeah. Yeah. So is there an underlying assumption that parallelization will help us go faster, and making, high utilization will make us go faster? Like everybody has to be busy and we have to have 5 things going at the same time because that's how
Well, I'm
stuff.
sure there's some of that.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, there's almost always we don't want anyone idle. It's like, well, no one's ever really idle.
Yeah, and
I mean,
you're not selling your developers' brain cycles. You're selling the stuff that they make.
yeah,
So focusing on how the stuff gets made or not is probably more effective than focusing on whether he's napping. If he's napping and his output doubles, do you really care?
yeah. It
You
sounds
shouldn't.
like the nap was a good use of their time.
Yeah, it sounds like you're not keeping an eye on what really matters, which is outcome at the end.
Right. Where someone
Yeah.
comes off and says, well, I don't know if they actually put in a good 40 hours. Is the product happy? Is the quality good?
Yeah. And by the way, is he sleeping enough? How's the marriage going? Any problems with his kids? There's a bunch of shit that you shouldn't care about.
Mm-hmm.
It's irrelevant. I mean, you're measuring, you're looking in the wrong place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What did you guys get out of it? What were you hoping to get? What did you get? How's it going?
Yeah.
So
He's not a machine. If your refrigerator isn't running, that's a problem. Your refrigerator should always be running. This is a person. They do their work differently. You have to look at it differently. Anyway.
it's possible. All right. So
That's it.
that's all.
Folks, that has been the end of this. I always forget. What is it? What's the ending?
Well, make the ending what you want it to be.
And that's this
been
agile thing. This has been this agile thing.
This has been this agile thing. There's this agile thing.
That's the end of this agile thing. That's what it was.
I have been Mike Markey, and you have been Matt Beam.
Mostly Matt Beam.
Mostly
Matt Beam.
All right, then.
Great. And see.
Until next time, folks.
Yes. Be safe.